You're all too much, thank you. So, a question that staff engineers get often asked, or like people just go like look around and stuff, is like, so like what does a staff engineer do? And a lot of the time, the reaction of staff engineers when being asked this question is this, like, ah, and then it's kind of like this, like, well, I don't really know what my job is, ah, and you know, like I've seen that so many times. I've been to, and one time was a tipping point where like I saw another staff engineer do like, I don't know what my job is, haha. I was like, no, like you know what your job is, or you should know what your job is, and like it's very difficult because it's a very ambiguous field, because like it's on one hand it's also like a very new role. So I mean, I think the first time I heard of something like a staff engineer was like maybe 10 years ago, but like books and writing that's being published on it is like there's 2 books that I know of that are full on the topic, and one was published in 2021 and the other one the end of 2022. So it's very new, it's a very ambiguous role, and that's why I came up and I was like, hey, you know what? Like, I think I can help with that. Like, I have experience in the field, I have read about it and all this stuff, and so like I can help so that, you know, next time a staff engineer has to introduce themselves, or, you know, somebody reads about it, they don't have to go like, I don't know what it is, but like they can give like some kind of answer. So this talk is called Going Staff. My name is Toby. You can find me on the internet as @Practop, and I'm also known as the Benchy guy locally. And like you might also be wondering now, like, why should I care? I'm not a staff engineer, why should I listen to you? And so as was teased in the introduction, being a staff engineer very much is also just about being a good engineer. It's about finding value in an organization. It's about being the glue that connects everything, that makes everything work. And so that's the role of a staff engineer, and we can all use more of that. So if you're a junior or mid-level developer, that gives you something to work towards too. Of course, you know, if you're a senior developer, that's like, oh, how can I take the next step? If you're a staff developer, you can always do a better job. We all know this. And also, if you're a team lead, engineering manager, a lot of the tasks are actually quite similar, as I will explain. And also, you might need to manage a staff engineer, so this will also help you. So this talk is based on these 2 books. The first book was the first one, published in 21. Quite frankly, not a huge fan of the book. Like, it is good, but the most important thing that it does is it introduces the concept of the archetypes of staff engineers that we'll talk about. But the second book by Tanya Riley, I'm a massive fan of. Like, I think everybody should read this book because it's a book about how do I create value in an organization? How do I make projects happen? How does all of this work together, and how can I help make it work? And that's just brilliant, and everyone on like every experience level should have more of that. And like reading that book, I sometimes felt silly for not reading it earlier, because like I read this and I was like, this is exactly the problems that I had, and that's also the solution I came up with after like 1 year of like pain and trying, and so like I was very happy. And also my own ideas and my own thoughts on the topic. I've been a staff engineer at Shopify. I was a staff engineer and then senior staff engineer at remote.com, and for a while I was the highest ranking individual contributor there. So I have some things to say about this. So the easiest answer to the question of like what's a staff engineer is like it's a new career path. Basically, it's a separate path, so you go senior engineer, and then you either go the management track, team lead, engineering manager, director, or like the staff path. And like those names might be exchanged in your particular organizations, but those are the ones that I work with. And like a lot of the time, it's presented as that above that, they merge. So if like at the VP or the CTO level, they merge. So like, yeah, if you've been a principal, you can become the CTO or the VP. It's like, no. Like I've never seen that happen. In my life, I've never heard of this, and so like that's why I don't include that merging of the paths, because I think it's just a fake bait, personally. So, what does a staff engineer do? So I would say it's technical leadership. So you are a leader, and you're there to help projects move forward. You bring your deep technical expertise, and you combine it with everything else to make projects happen, to help projects developers make the right decisions when they implement something and when they move something forward. And this is how I like to refer to it, as like the technical leadership path versus the people management path. You might be more accustomed to the wording of individual contributor. And I think this is a huge disservice to the discipline. And I'll tell you why. Because so when I first got this promotion, I worked in this job, I was like, OK, I'm an individual contributor now. I am measured by the code that I commit, by just my commits. So I need to get all the cool tickets, and I need to implement them. I need to ship them myself so that I get the praise, because that's my role now. And at some point, I started thinking, it's that's not like me. I'm the guy that always makes sure that everybody else around them, they can deliver, they can ship. And I think that's how I have the most impact in an organization, not by getting all the good stuff for myself. And I was almost sort of afraid of the person that I had become just by this wording. And I think it's best exemplified by this wonderful tweet. What is the difference between the staff level engineer and the manager? One of them thinks they code for a living. And I found it to be very true, and I also found it to be very reassuring to have this and other feedback on that, because I almost felt I was doing something wrong. And of course, that's not there's always exceptions. Let's say we have a Mihao, and we want to do faster JSON parsing. That's a staff level engineering job. It's Mihao, go, you make that faster. That's a staff level engineering job that not necessarily includes, as much communication. So there's always exceptions for people that have extremely deep knowledge about something. Or for instance, I've seen him pop up a couple of times today in the conference as well. And yesterday, Lucas from the online core team, whenever I open an issue or a pull request, he is there, he merges it, fixes it, does whatever within a couple of hours. That guy is amazing. That's also some deep staff level, engineer level work. So there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, most of your time is usually not spent coding. So I often see it referred to as, if you want to stay coding, you go to be a staff engineer. But I want to strike the coding out of there. If you want to stay technical, you review pull requests, you write technical documentations, you have discussions with stakeholders about technical details and how something should be implemented. That doesn't always mean code. And this is very well exemplified in, I know this is a long quote, but I love it so much. This doesn't necessarily mean you'll write a lot of code. At this level, your goal is to solve problems efficiently, and programming will often not be the best use of your time. Let others handle the programming. Staff engineers often take on ambiguous, messy, difficult problems and do just enough work on them to make them manageable by someone else. And this is, to me, what it basically exemplifies to be a good staff engineer. And this is from Tanya Riley's book, The Staff Engineer's Path. And I don't have any way to say this better myself. Later on, she goes on to say that what matters is that the problems get solved, not how. And that's your role. That's your role. Your role is to be there to enable problems to be solved very, very smoothly and to help everyone do it. So what does a staff engineer do, Toby? And the answer is it depends. And A, it depends on your company, because to me, a staff engineer is the exemplification of being one of the best engineers in your team. So whatever is most important to your company should be most important to you. For me, oftentimes that has been being a very product-driven engineer. I care so much about product. I was very happy. Well, I was very proud when our product manager went on parental leave. Not another product manager stepped in and was yeah, Toby, you do this. You know the product. Go. And that is very important, and that's because most of the organization I've worked in were very product-driven, product-focused. But for other companies, it might be something different. But it depends is also something else. It depends is your answer to every question you ask as a staff engineer. It's oh, should we do this or this? It depends. And it's half jokingly, but the more senior you get, the more you know that the answer to a question is usually not that simple. Yeah, I love Postgres, but Postgres isn't used for everything. I love Elixir, but sometimes Elixir is not the solution. We saw a bunch of people talking about XML parsing. Our solutions in Elixir and Erlang aren't great, so a Rust-Sniff might be the better solution for that. So I'll finally want to tell you about all the different archetypes of being a staff engineer. The first one is being a tech lead, where you're just the technical lead of a portion of a company, usually in some domain, and you just really help shape the roadmap, be a technical advisor, help people make the right decisions, basically. Then there's an architect, which is slightly different, because while the tech lead is usually very attached to like a single team, and the tech lead is also usually the most common in most companies, the architect is more on a higher level and like sees that all the things fit together. And as opposed to like the bad rep, usually they also get down to code, because you need to do that to see if an architecture is actually working. Then there's the solver, which is one that I find really funny, or well, fun. Actually, it's like, there's a hard problem, go solve the problem. Okay, solve the problem, they're done, and then there's another hard problem, go solve the problem. It might be a project that's stuck, and it might be that there's a very difficult problem, but those people usually tend to jump around the organization a lot. They tend to be very good, know the organization very well, and just be really good at their job, and then go solve these problems. And the other one that is also quite fancy is the right hand, where you basically extend the executive power. So maybe you report to a director or something, and they don't have the time to keep tabs on like everything. And like you go and basically represent them, their interest, and bring their opinion and like their area of work into the different things that you do, and you basically extend the power. So those are the official archetypes. I have one especially for you. I have another one, which was actually pointed out to me by my friend Sandrina, which is the senior 3. And so if you remember the list before, we had senior 1, senior 2. And senior 3 is basically you get the role of a staff engineer, but you don't change what you're doing. You're just basically a much better paid engineer that does the same thing, just maybe or hopefully a little bit better. And this often happens, one, when like a company just introduces the staff engineer role, because nobody knows what to do with these staff engineers, so it's like they keep doing what they did before. And the other time when this usually happens is you have a small company and they want to hire someone, but that wouldn't fit in their budget, so they make up a new title for them, and so like you get more money, you get a fancy title to come work for us, and so that's usually how these things happen. And the reality of it is, in like a company that isn't super huge, you usually do a bit of all of the above. You do all of this, and you jump in between them. You can't really fit into an archetype for like a company that's like maybe 200 engineers, because you're needed in so many different ways. And so one of my favorite things to talk about is where are staffs in the organizational chart? And I contend that if the staff developer is down there, so it's there with the other developers and reports to the team lead, that's a sign of being a senior 3 engineer, because you're still being treated as like all of the other engineers. I strongly believe that normally staff developers should report to the same level that their management counterpart reports to. So that means for staff engineer, team lead level, for senior staff on the director level, because that also gives you an increased scope of what you work on. It also makes your voice on problems more heard, because otherwise, if like a person down here is talking about a problem that like maybe the director cares about, it's filtered through like 2 levels, and so you reduce that, and so you get your problems through much, much easier. What I also like, which I haven't seen a lot, but is something that you don't always need to be right in that scale, because I like the concept of something like the office of the CTO, right? Where the CTO has like a team lead and maybe a couple of staff and senior engineers attached to push their initiatives forward. So I think they can also, it doesn't all have to be the strictly hierarchical. One of my other favorite pieces of writing ever on this topic is also by Tanya Riley, which is a talk called Being Glue. And there she talks about that the role of a staff engineer is to make everything just stick together, make everything work. All the pieces that fall up that nobody notices, you go, you pick them up, you make this happen. And this was instrumental to me when so in my beginning at Remote, I was asked, because we need more managers, if I want to switch to a team lead or if I want to stay a staff engineer. And I read this, and it really spoke to me, because I used to play basketball, and my coach literally called me the glue guy. The one that made the team stick together. I didn't always score the most points, but I played hard defense. I got the rebounds. I dove off the balls, and like every time we needed energy, I would be subbed in. And so I was like, wow, from this long ago, this is sort of like my identity. I always really liked that identity, and like I like to keep doing that. And that's what convinced me to say like, no, don't switch me over. I wanna stay a staff engineer. So what does this role give you? First of all, it gives you a seat at the table. When somebody, usually you're assigned to some domain, let's say for me it was payments, and somebody wants to do anything with payments, and then they go like, oh, go talk to Toby, go ask Toby, or like, oh, we have this initial meeting, go have the staff engineer of payments there. And this is really helpful and really crucial because it enables you to influence the direction of a project right there in the beginning. You're right there to say like, oh no, we need to take care of this, we need to talk to these people, we need to do all of that. And that is very important. And so as a senior engineer, you likely wouldn't be included in those conversations, but as a staff engineer, you are. So in a way, your role is also to be a connector, something that I always did. I did at least 2 coffee chats per week, because I wanted to just have small connections all over the company so that people knew when there's a problem, they could come talk to me. Or if I knew that something would be happening there, I could go talk to people. And so you're an enabler. So in the sense that like somebody wonders like, oh, I wonder how this thing with payments works. Like, oh, go talk to the staff engineer of payments or like of payroll or whatever domain there is. So being a staff engineer is actually a lot about like convincing people and talking to people about saying like, hey, we need to do this instead of this. We need to talk to these people, and we need to roll this out, basically. And it is also pushing for change, which includes a lot of convincing people to do what you think is best. And that also comes with its challenges, because it's a huge organization. How do you know everyone? How do you know these problems? How do you make this all work? So one of the ways that you can make it all work is you can make a map, which is also something that Tony Riley recommends, which is basically make a map of where is value in this company, where can we do a project that actually increases our productivity, and if so, who is the dragon that protects that treasure, and how do we slay that dragon? Do we want to go against that dragon, or do we maybe go to like some easier treasure? And so I would like to call it more organizational awareness, but like it is crucially important to know who to talk to and where can we actually provide the value. And so you need to think about and analyze what is your company like, what are the problems that you're struggling with right now, and where might these problems be solved efficiently. The other thing that is also really your role as a staff engineer is to avoid the local maximum. You can't see it on all screens, but like up there, there's a local maximum. And if you look to the left and the right, nothing is going to go better, nothing is improving, but there is a better way to do things. And that's where I would like to call back to Louis and both Sasha. That's where you go exploring. You need to explore new solutions to these problems that you're currently facing, because maybe there is a way to do things better, but you need to maybe drastically change things. And it is your role as a staff engineer to be like, you know what, we're in a local maximum. If we just change a small thing, it won't get better, but maybe we have to change a big thing to make things better. It is your role to come up with this and to explore these solutions. And this is actually my favorite slide of the whole presentation. I hope I won't talk too long about it, but context really is king. In order to make all of these decisions, you need to understand your code base, you need to understand your coworkers, but more importantly, you need to understand the product. Why are people using this? What are they paying for? Who are my stakeholders? What are their interests like? And who in the organization could block a change or not? And so you need to take all of this information in to realize what is a sensible change here? What is something that we can do to make this all better? And this is why I talk so much about being product-focused, because only then can you make these decisions. Because what I call sometimes the very senior approach to a thing is like everything needs to be perfect. Everything, no code can look bad, like we need to fix all the bad code. And I feel confident saying that because I used to be that engineer until my CTO went on a small sabbatical, and suddenly I was the interim CTO at a company, and everybody was like, yay, we're going to refactor all of that code now, yay! Toby is the CTO, we can do all of this. And I actually learned to know like more the pains that our users had and everybody else had. And I was like, you know what, actually, yes, that code is shit, but like, it doesn't have any known bugs right now. We don't plan any feature improvements on it right now, so like improving it yields nothing. On the other hand, we have all these issues over here that people are facing, and we can provide some real value there. To give you another example, I'm going to go with Mihao again, but I thought it was really cool. If you didn't catch the talk, please watch his talk. It was really cool. when designing, the JSON library to be included in the standard library, we have first looked at all the other solutions that are out there right now for JSON libraries, and showed that they returned all of these other weird formats because they were introduced before there was a map implementation. And so, because it was introduced in the standard library, he wanted to provide an easy way for them to move to his implementation. With a normal library, you could say, oh, fuck it, they all need to adjust to my format. But instead, he came up with a really cool mechanism where he had lots of callbacks for the parsing, where people could really adjust sort of the format that they would like their parsed JSON to be returned. And that really enables everyone to hopefully migrate to that. And that's, a lot of context, It's not just I focus on my library and what I do best. It's what is the context that I operate this in, and what is my goal? My goal is that everybody uses this library, so I need to make that easy. And so that's something I think is, really cool and really special. And another thing that, all of this knowledge of context really enables you to do is these 80-20 decisions, which is where you can get 80% of the value with 20% of the work. And that's really where your knowledge of the code base and of the product come together. When somebody comes oh, we should do this, and you go OK, can we do this? But in the outcome, if we just sacrifice this little, I can ship this in a week instead of 2 months. Would that be good? And oftentimes, that works, and there is such a solution. And so your role is also not to just say yes to everything that the product manager or the leadership comes up with. You're there to discuss these things. You say hey, no, if we did it like this, we lose that little feature, but it makes it much easier, and it leaves the system more maintainable. And oftentimes, there are really good compromises to find here. So one of the issues that I think you have as a staff engineer is that you need to lead and influence without direct power. So in lots of books, people say without authority. I don't agree with that, because through the higher position, hopefully through your good work, you have some authority that people think OK, this person can do their job. But what I mean with direct power is you don't have any reports. So it is very hard to convince people to work on the thing, you're oh, I have this great thing that will make everything better. Now, if we just all worked on this thing, we could improve our the performance of this thing by 20%, or we could improve our productivity by 30%. It's great. You still need to convince people to work on that. So you need to convince them. You need to convince their managers. You need to make the case for it, and it's very tough. And personally, and I mean, this may come to haunt me, but I think that due to this and other things that we'll talk about, I actually think that the job of a staff engineer can be much tougher than that of a manager of an equal level, because as the manager, you have your basically section that you care about, you have people reporting to you, and you can make stuff happen. As the staff engineer, you might jump around a lot more to different sections, and every time you want to do something, it's much more of a negotiation, much more of like getting people on board to do that, which actually requires you to be a better communicator in some cases. So I didn't want to say harder, but like it's harder to communicate because you would need to communicate with people that you don't know as well as the manager hopefully knows the reports. So what can you do? You need to lead by example. And you are a leader. It is a technical leadership role. You are a leader, and you are a role model. What that means is that your pull request reviews better be the best goddamn pull reviews in the goddamn company. You know, you need to be nice, you need to be constructive, but you also need to find things. You shouldn't be late to meetings, right? You know, if you want other people to be on time for meetings, you should be on time for meetings. Your tests better be some of the most extensive, because people look at whatever behavior you do and say, like, this is acceptable behavior, or this is like the behavior of like some of the best in this company. And so you are held, or you should be held, to much higher standards than anyone else in the company. And you can use that to your advantage by being that good at it, which you should be, or you can basically make it fail. And then, you know, once you're like a mean asshole to someone, people are like, oh, it's okay to be a mean asshole here, cool. And you don't want that. So the role comes really with a lot of ambiguity. It's not clear what you should be working on, how much coding you should do, how much of the technical leadership you should do, where you should do it, like where's your time best spent. It's really tough to figure out. And that's a downside, and you need to go and figure it out. But on the other side, I quite like this ambiguity in many ways, because it allows me to work on the problem that I think is the most important at that point in time. So I don't always have to stick with, my example, the payments team. If I see a problem way over in another team, I can go talk to my manager. I can be like, hey, there's this other problem that I think is much more important for the company as a whole. I think I want to work on that. And then if they agree, I can go there. So for me, it's a way that I can maximize my impact because I can always be where I think I'm the most needed or where I can provide the most help. And that's what makes me happy, So I still haven't answered what staff engineers actually do. So I'll give you a couple of examples of work that I think, in my mind, is especially, staff engineer worthy, or work that I've seen staff engineers do that I really, really enjoyed and really liked. The first is just being the technical lead on any project. Usually those are, as was said before, big, ambitious, messy projects. So think about like a multi-team project that nobody really knows where it's going or what's happening. Oftentimes these have like a trifecta as a lead of like product design and engineering, and you're that engineering lead there. You're great for that because while like an engineering manager or team lead also needs to do all the people management stuff, you can solely focus on that project and focus on shipping that project, and you can be there to help make the technical decisions, guide the people, get everybody aligned, and move towards one goal. One thing that I loved at Shopify is we wanted to work with something new, and then we had a staff engineer from the shipping domain come over and just give like 2 3-hour introductions, like basically super long presentations or workshops into that domain. And that was super helpful. Like, I sadly forgot the name of the guy, but like, thank you very much. It really helped us a lot. And there's also something that you were expected to do. Is there was somebody else from the team's like, hey, I don't know how to work with these APIs. You go there, you help them with all the knowledge that you've built up. Another thing that I did at a company was like, I looked at the code and was like, hey, how are we sending emails? So like, how are we doing all those backward calculations? It's like, oh, there's this async function. It's like, oh, what does the async function do? The async function does task async. Huh. There's no retries, right? Yeah. And when we deploy a new version, we lose all the states. So like, some of this might not get done. Not great for like, sending out payments or like, sending an email. You don't want to lose that data. So one of the first things I did was I introduced a background job system, Oban, which was also mentioned already many times here, which I think to this day was one of my biggest contributions to make sure that the system actually works reliably and does the things that it is supposed to do. One of my other personal favorites is I created a flaky test channel and like wrote a little reporter that always reported when the test was flaky. And at the beginning, it was just me in there, always taking all the people on their flaky test, like, here, please fix, or like, hey, you can fix it like this. I wrote lots of documentation around like, why are tests flaky and how do you fix them, and had that all there. And that was very fun. But like the moment I knew that I had made it in that part was when I went on vacation for like 2 weeks or something. I came back. And there were only very few flaky tests reported, but somebody else had taken care of all of them, had reported them and all of that. That's when you know you've made it. You're not needed anymore. The people are as invested in this as you are, or maybe not as much, but like invested enough, and like you can go do other stuff. And the other, I guess my actual favorite, is the Elixir training camp. So we started hiring engineers there with no background in Elixir whatsoever. And so I created a whole curriculum to like onboard them to Elixir, which was specific to our company. So for instance, something I did that some of you might find controversial, I said like, hey, don't worry too much about like gen servers and stuff, because like we didn't write many gen servers ourselves, because there it was always important to like be correct, like not lose any state. So I was like, hey, for working here, knowing Active very well is much more important to you than actually all of this gen server stuff. Like, it's good to know about, but like you won't actually use it here. And I was amazed how quickly the people from that program onboarded. And so then we had also weekly calls where we explained stuff with the channel, where people could ask questions. And I think I helped the company a lot. And that's like, you might say that's more of like an engineering manager or team lead task, but like I did it. I had fun with it, and I was very happy with the results. The other thing that I always think is a very crucial, very important part of being a staff engineer or like a technical lead is you summarize and you document. Like, I think we've all seen this, that there's a project going on, there's meetings about the project, and you have like 8 different meeting notes that are badly taken, that contradict each other, that nobody understands, and just sitting down, taking these and doing one document that you update that reflects the current state of knowledge about this project, that whoever wants to know about this project, you can go like, hey, read this. And it's very great. And so what we avoid there is a situation like this. I think it's all too easy that when you go in a meeting and just talk to someone, you're like, yeah, we all agree on this. Like, yeah, we have the exact same idea in our head. So what you need to do, or what you can do through writing things down, being like, people, hey, is this what you mean? You're like, oh, like, nah, that's not what I meant at all. And then you can start a process of synthesis, of like bringing all of those ideas together so that you actually know what's happening. And I actually did this recently. I came back from vacation. It was like, yeah, we need to build this thing with like RabbitMQ and Postgres. And I was like, what? Why? What is happening? I don't know. And like I asked people. I got lots of like conflicting answers. And so I just sat everybody down and was like, here, this is the thing. And then it's like, okay, for whom are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Who's going to use this? How long do they need the data? What data do they need? What do they need the data for? And then at the end of that meeting, we all figured out that none of the proposed solutions before actually solved the problem. And we came up with a third solution that nobody sort of like had on their mind. And for me, that's a gigantic win, because that's like all that code that we could have written to just realize it's not solving the problem. We never needed to write it. You know, like we went there straight away. And I am really proud of that personally, and that's something that a work that I think a staff engineer should do and should be doing. And so, by the way, I stole these graphics. They're from a blog post called the Agile Inception Deck from Jonathan Rasmussen. I've known this for like 10 years, and like all these images live rent-free in my head forever, and I just love this so much. And like before, say, Toby, you never program anything. That's not true. It's almost true, but not true. One of the things that I did program was we had a bug in the system where I don't know if people know this, like I didn't know this before, but basically SEPA bank transfers by default have a limit of 100,000 euros. And so when you go over that limit, the Stripe API just fails, which is not a great experience. And so like, oh, who pays 100,000 euros? And let's say maybe a company runs all of their payroll through you, then 100,000 euros per month is not that much, actually. And so this was a bug that didn't pop up that often, but A, it was during payment, so that is critical, and B, it's for your highest paying customers. You're inflicting pain on your highest paying customers. And so that's also, let's say, where we would say that like the product knowledge comes in. At the time, the team was busy with other important work, and I knew this work was important. I didn't have anything else like too important going on, and so I took on this problem, which is also not that easy because you got to deal with the old gnarly Stripe API code. You got to implement like a new data structure to like map it to, so that's 2, and then like what do you do if one of the 2 payments fails that add up to 150K and like all of that. And actually shipped this live with a bug that I knew about. And the bug was that if somebody wanted to pay like 100,000 euros and 50 cents, the second payment would fail because 50 cents is too low of an amount. And then Stripe would say like, no, no, no. And like, so I could have delayed the launch of this, but I was like, hey, A, very unlikely to happen. B, it's 50 cents. Like, if it fails, deducted from my paycheck, I don't care. Like, I ship this now. And that's another thing where, like, just being completely right isn't always your best option. Like, it was much more important that this launches at the time. And like, the bug is somewhat easy to fix. But we didn't have agreement on how the different splitting should work. So I was like, OK, like, I don't wait for this. I ship this now. And by the way, there's also, for instance, there I applied property-based testing, which, splitting money is scary. And it's like a great use case for property-based testing. And like to make sure that I don't lose any money. And like I actually found, I think, 2 edge cases. I'm not sure if they would have ever happened, but it was really great to have that assurance. So an issue that like surprisingly a lot of staff engineers run into is snacking. Like not just this snacking, but what this means is you're working on lots of small tasks, basically, because the problem with dealing with big, messy projects all the time is they take a long time to finish. So it takes a long time to get that gratification of like, yes, I did that. So a thing that lots of people can gravitate to is like doing lots of small things to get, the fun of like having shipped something, having done something. And every now and then that's okay, but like you shouldn't be doing this all the time. So you need to be aware of that, because another way to express this is you should be moving rocks, not pebbles. So, yeah. Another thing that I found and learned and found super useful to myself was okay, you're in a situation, you're in a project, and everybody agrees on the solution. You come in, and you like 80% agree on the solution. There's like some 20% that you don't agree. What do you do? And I think the impulse of a lot of us is like, oh, I'll need to tell them, and there's 20%, we need to make it the best solution. And no, like, it depends on the 20%. Obviously, if the 20% is a critical bug that nobody can ever fix, like, of course, tell them. But generally speaking, what would happen if you did that? You need to write up a new proposal, you need to have other people review the proposal, and then you need to align everybody who's already aligned on your new proposal, and that delays the whole project by weeks, maybe months. And also, you spend all of that time to make something a tiny bit better, when you could have spent all of the time make something else much better. So in that situation, oftentimes it's actually better to just agree, put your weight behind that, make it move forward, make them aware of what the potential pitfalls are, but like don't say like I need another proposal, we need to do this whole other way. Make sure they're good, and then the project can move forward. That way you can get much more done. And another very hard-learned lesson I actually learned from the old VP there, Paulo Pereira, was like, no decision is a decision. It is the decision we are fine with the status quo. Like, we don't want to move forward with any of these improvements, so we're good with whatever we have right now. And I found it to be very valuable in my work to always point that out. Like, in the decisions that I post for people, like when I write an RFC or an ADR or whatever proposal, I'm always like, we can do all of these things, or we can stay with what we have right now, with all of these downsides that come with it. And sometimes it's very fun. In a meeting, it's like, oh, no, we can't decide. Maybe, no, let's talk later. And I was like, OK, like, let's postpone. I'm like, OK, so you're fine with sticking with what we have right now, with all of these issues that's calling. Is that what you're saying? Because that sounds what you're saying. And this is something I found very important as a mental model to help organizations realize what it actually means. So all of this talk about like what actually is a staff engineer, what do they do is, so do you want to go staff, or like should you be going to a staff engineer role is the question. And sure, you can. This is, let's say, the way as most people see it, that's the most common way. You get promoted to staff engineer, then senior staff, and so on and so forth. A path that is actually much more common is, or like, I'm not sure much more common, but I've seen a lot more actually personally, is that you first go be a team lead, and then you switch to being a staff engineer. That's also what happened to me and what happened to a lot of other people. And I think it has to do with this shift in your point of view, because as a team lead, you get much more contact to like the stakeholders and everyone around you. So the shift of focus of what is actually important to deliver, that really helps. Of course, this is also possible. Go to engineering manager and then to staff, or to senior staff engineer, or to staff engineer down there. So there's quite some switching around. I've seen it happen that like directors go straight to principal engineer, and like that I'm not as much of a fan of, because like while I would say they're quite similar, they're not that similar. And like I've also never seen a principal engineer become a director, or like a senior staff engineer become a director. So like that's not always a two-way thing. But what also happens quite often is, you go staff engineer, you go team lead, you go back to staff engineer, So what I also want to imprint on people is that it's not like you choose this path once and then this is your destiny. You can never do anything else. So there is mobility between the paths. And to me, the tasks between a staff engineer and the team lead are much more similar than the task between the staff engineer and the senior engineer, or a team lead and the senior engineer. It is a different work. It is leadership work. It is pushing projects forwards. And you got to ask yourself the question, do you enjoy that work? I personally strongly believe that every staff engineer should be able to be a good team lead. You might not want to be a team lead for whatever reasons, and that's fine. But like, should you put all your energy to it, you should be able to, because you need a lot of the same leadership, communication, and people skills that a team lead needs. And yeah. So the answer to this question, as to every question, like being a staff engineer, do you want to be, is like, it depends on what you want to do, what you like, what you don't like. But when people just ask me this question sort of like straight out, I usually tell them, do you want to get promoted quickly? Yes? Don't become a staff engineer. So getting the promotion is like really, really hard. And like, especially if you're in a company with like a lot of attrition or like lots of new hires. I'll try to show you why. So you hire new people in like a quickly growing company, as like lots of startups are, whereas I think where a lot of us work, there's a new team, and it's like, oh, we need someone to manage that new team. OK, we promote someone to be the team lead. And usually, it's like you look around, you see like, oh, this person seems good with people, let's promote them to team lead. Also, when the manager leaves, oh, you seem the most apt. OK, you get promoted. Now we need to promote somebody else. So let's take this person, promote them. And so the number of managers needed in a company is a function of the number of employees, basically. Or like how many manager promotions are needed is a function of the attrition and the new hires. For staff engineers, nobody has any idea. Like, there's some companies where it's enforced that like every team has at least one staff engineer on them, but that I've only seen very rarely. Otherwise, it's more like a make-guess nature of like how many staffs do you need. So it's not as easy to see the need for a company to actually have staff engineers or promote to being a staff engineer. And so getting the promotion is awfully hard. So a lot of the times you're actually expected to already be doing the work, which I think is a very big difference, because I think most of the managers are promoted based on, let's say, potential. Like, I think you can do the job, so you get promoted. Like, it's very rare, thankfully, that people are like, OK, let you be a team lead for like a year. You manage these 6 people. You're still called senior engineer. You don't get more money. You'll do that, and then afterwards you get a promotion. Isn't as common, I hope. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. But as a staff engineer, it's very common. There's also another thing that's sort of common, is you need to have a staff project. So you have this big, messy, complex project. You need to do this. You already do the work of a staff engineer. It takes 1 to 2 years. And afterwards, if you're happy with the project, you get promoted. So it's very tough. And so the management detour, as I mentioned, can sometimes be very helpful getting there faster. And to illustrate how big this problem is, let me tell you a little story from Shopify. So while I was at Shopify, they were saying, we're happy to announce Raphael's promotion to principal. So Raphael is Raphael Franza, who is a member of the Rails core team, and so is a very well-distinguished Ruby engineer. And my reaction was this, what? Raphael is getting promoted to principal engineer? And it's like, he wasn't a principal engineer anymore? And to understand this, we had a tech leadership channel where all the team leads plus and all the staff engineers plus were in it. Every time there was a discussion in that channel, people called on Raphael. And Raphael gave his opinion, and everyone accepted his opinion. I might have disagreed with it, but I can see that it was well argued, and it was probably the best thing for us to do. And so he was effectively working as the principal engineer this whole time. And so I always just assumed from the way he behaved and what he did that he was a principal engineer. So I was really confused. And some years later, I found this tweet where it's blah, blah, blah. But then it says, I spent 3 years trying to convince people I should be already a principal, not promoted to. And my reaction was just this, if even Raphael can't get promoted to a principal engineer with how obvious it was that he was a principal engineer, how does anyone of the rest of us have any shot at this? Getting a staff role can be difficult. Today's job market, I think we all know, it's not that great. And so, as you've seen before, I actually right now don't carry the title of staff engineer, which is sort of funny giving this talk. I had an offer to be a principal engineer for a big company, but I decided against it. But usually these roles are very, very hard to get, because lots of times staff engineers are only promoted internally because it's very hard to hire for, and lots of companies don't even have the staff engineer title. So for instance, most very small companies, unless they follow the senior 3 pattern, they do not have a staff engineer. So it is tough, and your best shot is to be in a company, show what you can, and then maybe be promoted to a staff engineer. Getting that role straight away is very tough. Sometimes you get upgraded during the interview process, but it's also quite tough. So time to summarize a bit. What is a staff engineer, or what is the role? It's a technical leadership role where you rely a lot on the context that you build through conversations and working with people to ensure delivery. That's, if you only take one thing away, I want you to take away this. That's what a staff engineer is. That's what a staff engineer does. I want to just quickly tell you about some of the, let's say, bigger challenges that I faced while working in that role. One, I've alluded to this a number of times. Everyone is very busy, super busy. Both the people, you can get the people to work on something, but especially top-level management is super busy. And oftentimes you write a proposal hey, we should do this. Yay, and you're really excited about it. And nobody even reads it. And it's So it's really hard to get people on projects. And Prioritization is hard, like for yourself, like knowing what to work on, because there's always so much to work on, is super hard. But what is even harder is forming alignment. You pick a problem, you're like, oh, this is what we should do, this is what we should forward to. And as the saying goes, if you have 5 engineers in the room about a problem, you have about 8 opinions about how to solve that problem correctly. And what I found helps with that is first, it sounds very businessy, but I started writing executive summaries. So like at the top of the proposal, there's like a small thing. Here's what we're doing, here's why we're trying to do it, and this is how it will help us. Which you will feel like you omit all of the details, but that at least, the higher level managers can read, get an idea, and if that catches their interest, they may read the rest of the document. They may not, but at least you have something that is digestible for them in their very busy timetables. The other thing that we found to be very helpful was to create dedicated spaces. So, if you have a discussion that just goes on in the main channel, then in a thread that is like 130 messages long, nobody will remember that discussion, or it will be great to do. Dedicated, for us, Slack channel with like a Notion doc that details the problem, detailed solutions to it, and always be very loud about, it's like, hey, we're doing this thing, where you can join the Slack channel, and here's what we've achieved. So that way people have a way to discuss about it in a separated space, and that way you can actually get some traction going. And one thing specifically for myself, I think in my time I should have focused a lot more on shipping, because I was very much in the role where I was saying, like, okay, my role is to make this project, break it down to a level where somebody else can solve it. If nobody else comes to solve it, what did you really do? Like, it's still value that you created by making the problem more understandable for people, but in the end, if it isn't fixed, did you really do anything? Tree, woods, sound, the thing, right? And so what I wished I would have done like a little bit differently was that instead of breaking down 3 projects to be manageable by others that nobody else is taking on, break down 1 project, try to find people to take it on. If they don't, ship it myself. Because that way I would have actually shipped something at that. Like, it's not that I never shipped something, but this is something I wish I had done different. So this is the feeling that I'm often left with in 2 different meanings. One meaning is me going like, oh, I've broken this down, my job here is done, you can take this on, and then nothing happens. But the other one, which is also the success case oftentimes, is like, I broke it down, people took it over, and my job is done, and nobody remembers that I had any part in this at all. And that's also where you need to drop your ego. It's fine that like other people are celebrated for this project that you really helped deliver, that you think you majorly shaped, but basically most people, except for the people that were at the beginning, have forgotten any involvement, and so everybody thinks you had nothing to do with it. But yeah, this is the problem. Oh, yeah. This is the feeling of a staff engineer, sorry. So yeah, that's me. It's my talk going staff, and thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, we started with a bit of a delay, but it seems that the staff engineer can answer most of the questions during the talk. What was not answered, I would like to just address a quick question here. Any suggestions for dealing with the very, very technical managers as a staff engineer?
I sort of feared this question would come up. It's very difficult. I don't know, like, I don't have a great answer for you, whoever you are, but like I always try to create a knowledge or a feeling in the room that like, hey, we have a technical leadership role for a reason. Like, I'm down in the code, I talk more to the people who are in the code and see the problems more than you do, because like you sometimes have this problem where like the managers on the same level, like they argue with you about all of these things at the same level, and like try to create an understanding that like, hey, we have technical leadership for a reason, and we have people leadership for a reason. Like, maybe trust my judgment on this a bit more because I'm more down there. Of course, that's hard to communicate and hard to get over well, and I'm not saying you should ignore their opinion. Their opinion is good and valid and where it comes from, but yeah, I guess that's like the best I can say at this point, sadly, for that. It's definitely been a struggle.
Yeah. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Toby.